Um, good afternoon, everyone. It's a beautiful day in Tallahassee. And what we wanted to talk with you today is about bicycle, pedestrian, and transit facilities, and especially the changes that we've been making to the PPM, the design standards, the Greenbook, and also some news and opportunities for you to provide public comment. Again, for 2013, we'll be talking about improvements for bike ped and transit. And also, I'm going to give you just a little bit of update on some of the research we've been doing. The key topics in the PPM will be the urban area maps. Some of you guys still are not seeming to know that we have these. Sidewalks and crosswalks, shared use paths, and especially some changes in design speeds and horizontal alignment calculations because of changes from AASHTO. And then some changes in how the guidance we've developed for shared lane markings. The urban area maps, I just want to encourage everyone when they start a project to first go to the Office of Design's Roadway Designs webpage, and there's a link to the urban area boundary maps because your location on the map is going to influence what your requirements will be for the provision of bike and ped facilities within your project. So sometimes I've talked to some people and they haven't yet been aware of the urban area maps, so I just want to re-emphasize that. Sorry for the moment of silence. We have some photos in the presentation that weren't coming up, but hopefully we can show those to you in just a minute because they're really great and they say a lot. A picture is worth 1,000 words, so you're going to have to put up with text. So if you have sidewalks on both sides of the street, that's always preferred. But if you only have the sidewalk on one side, you have to think about your access to facilities and services on the other side of the street. So maybe you put a sidewalk in on one side of the street on a rural road where you might not need the sidewalks on both sides, but you have a park that's on the other side. So think about your crossing and how the people who want to walk to that park will be able to safely cross the street. Then the next thing is the termini of sidewalks. We've worked a lot on this section in the PPM. And, we're hoping that we can, that if you're thoughtful in the beginning of your design, that you will think about how you can extend the accessibility of your facility by actually connecting the existing pedestrian features within your project and adjacent projects. So they should connect with facilities on the adjoining project. This really we shouldn't have to say, but we do need to say. Then consider extending the sidewalk to next appropriate crossing or access point when no sidewalk is present. And be sure to coordinate with your district bike and ped coordinator. They're very tuned in with what are concerns for the community, where we've been having safety problems. And so talk with your district bike and ped coordinator about how you can improve the accessibility of these sidewalks and especially where appropriate termini should be. And then for driveways, we have to thank District 5 for this improvement. But we want you to really look and evaluate your driveways to see if it is in fact possible to upgrade the non-conforming driveways. They may be too narrow, they may have excessive cross slope. In the past, in projects, we had challenged you with focusing on your curb ramps, your detectable warnings, but now we also want you to look at your driveways because there's no point in building wonderful new sidewalks and for the person with a disability to have to then go out into the street because the driveway itself is too steep. But one of the things is the improvements must be feasible within the scope of the project. So we're not expecting that you buy right of way or go to extensive efforts in order to upgrade the driveway, but we want you to think about it and fix it if it's possible. And this is a 4-foot arrow. That's actually the graphic that goes with the photo that shows this beautifully relocated crosswalk and crossing of a side street and a separation of the crosswalk from the stop bar with at least 4 feet. It probably looked like it was about 6 feet. So, anyway, hopefully, one thing that will happen is we post all these and you guys will be able to see them if you log on and look at them. And maybe after Jeff and Sherry do their presentation, we might have a chance to just flash these photos back up for you. Okay. Newer reconstructed sidewalks shall meet the criteria in Chapter 8. Detectable warnings and curb ramps for existing sidewalks and shared use paths shall be brought into compliance with ADA requirements. It used to be that we were relatively, we had a lot of information in Chapter 25, which is the 3R chapter, and we're trying to consolidate our information so that you as a designer can go to one place and find what you need. And so we've moved some of this information from Chapter 25 into Chapter 8 so that you'll know that if you're building a new sidewalk or doing a major reconstruction of a sidewalk, we actually hope that you will make the effort to fully conform with ADA. So, okay, good. Hopefully this will work a little bit better. This is the picture I was trying to show you, and especially what, there's a couple points in this photo. One is that I really appreciate, if you guys remember, we showed this sidewalk last year when it was just a pile of dirt. And I really appreciated one of the people who had attended the webinar last year. They happened to be out here in US 41 in Citrus County and stopped to take this photo of the completed sidewalk. And you can see now how the sidewalk has transitioned from the back of the swale back down to the roadway to be able to put that crossing in a location where you're safely in front of where drivers would be stopping, so it's more likely they're going to see you, yield to you. But it also gave us the opportunity to get the crossing in on a part of this side street connection that is a little bit more level and to create a more accessible route. So it's just a wonderful illustration, and I just really appreciate when people send me pictures of good work and also when we have good work to show. So everybody spent a lot of time on this, and it's just so well done and apparent. So newer reconstructed sidewalks, we've talked about this, detectable warnings and curb ramps. So we want these sidewalks to meet the criteria in Chapter 8. Focus on your detectable warnings and your curb ramps for existing sidewalks and shared use paths. And remember, too, that shared use paths need to be compliant with ADA, because sometimes instead of building sidewalks, we're actually building shared use paths, but we want to be able to have that consistent, accessible environment. If you have an ADA complaint for a sidewalk or driveway turnout within your project limits, you should strive to upgrade those non-conforming elements to be in compliance with ADA. And so especially you want to look at the criterion indexes 304, which is curb ramps, 310, which is sidewalks, and 515, which is driveway turnouts. And the termini of sidewalks, you should connect them with facilities on adjoining projects, intersections, or access points. And we'll have a nice little picture of that towards the end when we talk about the transit facilities, but try to always maintain connectivity as you work through your project. This is a little cartoon that was out on the internet, and I just thought this was great, a paradigm shift. So what about if drivers were all expected to push a button before they could get across the road? Would people think that system was okay? Here's an example of a wonderful crosswalk that has been put in Scottsdale, Arizona to support a very heavy commercial shopping district on both sides of the roadway. It's a 6-lane arterial, and what they've done is they've created a staggered crossing to allow the pedestrian to move first through one leg and then through the median, turning them to look through traffic, and then turning them back again to turn across the road. What's really neat about this crosswalk is the timing on the signal, and it's a hawk signal, is such that when they start, like let's say, hopefully you can see my pointer on the screen, when they start to make this crossing, they're detected, and then this signal over here is cued to start by the time they've negotiated this linear piece in the medium. So it's really this incredibly convenient and encouraging way to cross what is a busy road and supports a very vibrant commercial district. And here's just a picture of all of the pedestrians who are using this crossing. It's very successful, and people are crossing where we want them to be crossing, and it's really working. Then let's talk a little bit about shared lane markings and a change in the PPM. in the PPM in the past, we were maybe a little too restrictive. We weren't really consistent with the MUTCD. So we've revised it to say they should be limited to 35-mile-an-hour roadways. But FHWA recognizes there might be appropriate engineering reasons to use on higher speed roadways. And if you have questions about this, you can just call us and I can share with you the memo that we received from Federal Highway. The other change that we made in the PPM is that if you have a construction project, you, as part of your temporary traffic control plan, you can use the SHARO as a way to help route cyclists out of that construction zone and an alternative route and return them outside of the limits of the construction project. That might be a handy technique, kind of a nice way to inform people as to where they could travel. Shared use paths was another change that we made to the PPM, and here the most important part is and there's somewhat conflicting goals, is one, you should be designing by the bicyclist's operating characteristics, so that's their speed of travel, and then at the same time you should be trying to meet accessibility criteria. And for now, the 2006 ADA standards for transportation facilities are the adopted ADA standards, but to remember that they were really written for buildings, and so in a lot of areas they don't address issues that you would encounter within the public rights-of-way. So always remember to be thinking about PROAG and using PROAG to supplement the criteria in the ADA standards. This is an example from the Four Freedoms Trail in Madison, which is just a beautiful trail. This trail was designed, I think, actually in-house by DOT. And there's the Four Freedoms Monument on the left, and then the trail which runs along a state highway up between Madison, Florida, and the Florida-Georgia border. So I encourage you all to go. They need our tourism dollars. Okay. The U.S. Access Board has published a supplemental notice of proposed rulemaking. I just wanted to give you a heads up on this. And what they've done is they've been writing PROAG. It's been published for several years, and they also at the same time were writing parallel guidance for shared use paths. And they've made a decision to try to incorporate the shared use path guidance into the PROAG guidance, so you would really have one-stop shopping. And it's going to apply to the design and construction and alteration of then all pedestrian facilities in the public right-of-way. And it ensures that these facilities are accessible. Included in the slide presentation is a web link if you download this from our website, but also just to let you know that the comments are due May 14th. If you're a DOT person, Dean Perkins, who is sitting in here with us, he's just send your comments to him, and he is coordinating those comments. But just kind of as a summary of the key points, and the Access Board has been working quite a bit in the past year with the state DOTs and through AASHTO to get our opinions on some of the advanced language. And they've been very responsive. And so, you know, as they've added these new provisions for shared use paths and specifically address grade, cross slope, surfaces, and protruding objects, the points that I really like about this new language will be that it clarifies, of course, that the grade of paths not exceed 5%, or the general grade of adjacent street if contained within a highway right-of-way. And most of you know that we've always had this provision for sidewalks, you know, in PROAG. So they're extending that to shared use paths. But for shared use paths, they've also included this provision that you have these additional exceptions for grade where constraints could be imposed by terrain, infrastructure, or other factors that make compliance impractical. There's a project that I worked on in Bay County that involved the state park. And because of the sensitive environment in the state park, we were able to exceed that 5% slope because the impact of cut and fill to achieve the appropriate slope would have just been too detrimental to the facility that we were trying to give people access to. So, and then you're going to be required to have curb ramps and blended transitions across the full width of the path. And for those of you in Florida, you've already been having to do this for years. It's been in the Greenbook for as long as I can remember, and it's been in the PPM for at least several years. Okay. Shared use paths. Just an example of where the curb ramp shall be the same width of the path. The photo on the left is the Gopher Frog and Alligator Trail in the Apalachicola National Forest. And the photo on the right is actually a path in Brevard, North Carolina that gives you access to the Pisgah National Forest. But I've been getting a couple calls recently about a topic, and so I thought I would take advantage of these slides to kind of emphasize that there has been a new AASHTO bicycle facilities guide that's been developed, and in that guide they include language regarding bollards, and that is that the routine use of bollards to restrict motor vehicle traffic is not recommended. Okay, and so I really want you guys to think about bollards and how you use them, and especially if you look at the photo on the left, anybody who really wanted to drive on that path could just drive between the brown sign and the bollard and get on it anyway. So we're going to just eliminate bollards from our projects, and instead we're going to really be thinking about how do we improve the safety of people who use shared use paths crossing the highways. So I want you to focus on improving the crossing of the roadway itself through markings, signs, raised medians, curb extensions, beacons, and lighting. And please don't start with every possible tool when you start design. You should be working to use the most simplest of means, like crosswalk markings and signs and advanced warning information, and work up as you need to. But you don't, this is an illustration of a rapid rectangular flashing beacon. You don't need one of these at every crossing. Only use these where they're really needed. The photo on the right is a modification. This is from Olympia, the Interurban Trail. But it's a modification to the use of bollards, and if you really feel that you need them, this is a more appropriate style. Okay, and other things in the publication of the new AASHTO bike guide is instead of the old 20-mile-an-hour design speed, they're now using an 18-mile-an-hour design speed. And you can see the path on the left is the International Speedway Drive Trail. I think it's probably got a different name, but it's in DeLand, and you can see the nice gentle curve around the culvert, and then on the right is the Suncoast Trail, and you can see what a beautiful job it does in following the natural landscape and the gentle contour, and it is a very attractive trail. So this table in the PPM has changed, table 8.6.2, and what you've seen is that with the dropping in design speed, the minimum radius for changes in direction of the trail has been decreased up until, except that when you get to the higher speeds, 30 miles an hour, like it's, you know, you're going to need a significant grade to get to that. But they've reduced the coefficient of friction, which ends up resulting in a higher minimum radius that you're going to need. But be thoughtful about incorporating these appropriate changes in direction into your projects. Okay. And then the other major change that was driven by the changes in the AASHTO bicycle design guide is the stopping sight distance. And again, you know, with the reduction in the average design speed to 18, it's we were able to reduce some of the stopping sight distance that is required in designing your trails. But make sure you go to the PPM and look at this in detail if you're involved in designing a shared use path. Then this is just kind of a housekeeping thing, but to be thoughtful about using some of the exhibits that we have in volume 2 of the PPM, and just to let you know that the shared use path exhibit is now known as typical 19. Its number has changed. If you're wandering around in chapter 6, I think it is, looking for these typical sections. Then key topics for that changed in the 2013 design standards. So level landings, you aren't required to put a level landing at the bottom of the curb ramp anymore, but if your curb ramp is intersecting a roadway that has a pretty significant counterslope or cross slope, if you do put that level landing in at the bottom, it helps a person using a wheelchair to actually negotiate these changes in the cross slope. The detail in Index 400 for the guardrail adjacent to the sidewalk, what we've done is we've just clarified that if you have a guardrail that's protecting a drop-off and there's a shared use path behind the guardrail, to be conscientious about adding this little pipe rail to help protect the sidewalk or shared use path user. And even though it says 4 feet, remember that's a minimum, and you can always provide more separation if it's possible, okay? For the Index 515, which is the driveway turnouts, this was more of a housekeeping, but we still had a few places in the standards where we were showing this minimum width in these driveways at of the sidewalk at 3 feet, and I think we've pretty much caught them all. And just to know that we're looking for a minimum of a 4-foot accessible route through these driveways. The Index 600, the pedestrian longitudinal channelizing devices. I know Azal has been giving some training on this, but just to remind you that we now have products that can help to channelize the pedestrian through a work zone that are in conformance with the criteria in the MUTCD and ADA. They need to be a minimum of 32 inches high. They should have an 8-inch detectable edge at the bottom. And you can have a little gap for drainage, but not more than 2 inches. And they should have a footprint or an offset of at least 2 feet. And we have a picture of a very nice installation from Miami. And I think that the more we talk with you about this and are able to show you different ways that this has been successfully done, we'll be able to do a better job at protecting pedestrians, especially pedestrians who might have a vision limitation in the work zone. But this is really nicely done. Another detail was Index 870 and 880. I only showed it once because it's basically the same detail. Now, some of you, when reading this, you'll see down here, so what we've got is your guide rail, which is mounted into this concrete wedge on adjacent to a sidewalk to protect the pedestrian from a drop-off. Some of you were looking down here at this little tiny part that said 3 feet minimum. And so you were thinking that the sidewalk could be 3 feet wide, but that's not really true. It's just that you need at least 3 feet of that section of sidewalk to provide that stability for the way that this railing is constructed. Your sidewalk still needs to be 5 feet wide, at least. Okay. Shared lane markings. We've got a research project going on in the Jacksonville area where we've been adding shared lane markings, and through that we learned that we needed to add a little bit more guidance in this, and that if you have travel lanes that are 11 feet or less than 11 feet, just put your shared lane marking in the center of the travel lane. We don't want the shared lane marking to get past center. It should be centered or hopefully more to the right-hand side. We want bicyclists to be riding in that right-hand third of the lane. And that was that detail. Then just, I only have a few more minutes, so we're going to just talk about some of the research projects we've been working on. One is the shared lane markings. This is the Bridge of Lions. These are examples. This is Riverside Drive. Another problem is, you know, we hadn't thought about the width of that lane, and our shared lane markings got over too far to the left, so don't do as we do. But what just wanted to share with you that with the sharrows, we're finding that the lateral separation between the bicyclist and the driver increases from 4.06 feet to 4.5, and if you're an SUV driver, actually it's changed from 3.7 feet to 4.7 feet, so it's almost a foot difference of separation between the driver and the bicyclist that we're getting on the roadways that we've added the sharrows to. Also, just in our own personal experiences from riding there, people yell at us less. So another thing is that drivers are more willing to, just kind of confirms that increased separation, drivers are more willing to move over a little bit more to the left into the adjacent lane. Then we've got the shared bicycle bus lanes. is another research project that's recently been completed. This was in conjunction with Cutter at USF. And just want to let you know that what we found is basically there is no consistency in shared lane markings in the shared bus bicycle lane guidance. And so I'm getting a lot of distraction in here from my coworkers. So anyway, if you can find this research project online. And what we found is that there's so much variation that there's still more research that needs to be done. But we couldn't find any consistency in lane width and speed or anything that would really help us to create definitive criteria. The Nebraska Avenue Road Diet, another successful project that we've been talking with you about before, but we finally completed a 3-year study of the crashes post-construction. We added bike lanes, sidewalks, crosswalks, bus bays. And we found that with 3 years worth of data, crashes were still consistently going down, especially the total crash rates from 8.5 to 3.3 crashes. And that fatal and incapacitating crashes had decreased by 33%. That's pretty darn good. And in this, we've included a web link because this project is now featured on the Project for Public Spaces right-sizing page. And if you just Google PPS right sizing, you can get to a whole host of photos and additional information. And then I think what we'll do is we'll probably stop here because Ben already talked about the Greenbook. But just for you to know that if you want to, you always can go online, and we've posted both the current version of the Greenbook and the proposed version. And so you're welcome to look through there. It's in track changes in redline, and you can see the changes that are underway. Okay, thanks.
For those of you that are still online with us, while we're on break, we do have Mary Ann Coos still in the room with us, and we have a few questions that came in for her, so we're going to go ahead and try to address the ones that we can. So, again, here's Mary Ann Coos.
Okay, you guys have lots of good questions, so we're just going to pick a few that we can handle while you're waiting for the next presentation. The first question is what aspects of the driveway should we seek to upgrade if feasible? And then it follows in parentheses, grade, sidewalk cross slope, width, spacing. I think grade is going to, first of all, be very important, especially, you know, if it significantly exceeds a 2% cross slope. Width, you know, you see that we're expecting to have this 4-foot accessible route in there. ADA would allow you to have a 3-foot wide accessible route. So if it's less than 3, that would be a very important point to work towards correcting. So we've talked about width, spacing. Spacing is a good question, and always even for access management, there are a lot of benefits if you can reduce the number of driveways, combine driveways. So minimal spacing, if it's possible to reduce the number of driveways, that's always a plus. Let's see, another question that came in. Is there a way to enforce single file for the bicyclist on the shared roadway? Well, bicyclists, you know, are allowed to ride 2 abreast unless they're impeding traffic. And this question of impedance is not really well defined in statute. For bicyclists, it's preferred, you know, that they would ride single file and, you know, as a courtesy to the other people they're sharing the road with. But there is no requirement that they have to ride single file unless they're specifically impeding traffic. And I think that's really for the officer or the judge to decide. We do have, if you're interested in this, you can email me later and we can send you a really great handbook on bicycle and pedestrian traffic laws that explains this in much greater detail. So send me an email if you'd like and I can send you that handbook. Then the next question is it necessary to connect a bike lane with a shared use path? No. If you think about it, it's going to be, well, you need to, I guess maybe this is a yes or no. One is your shared use path should always have a separation from the roadway. So it's going to be very hard to connect this facility, the shared use path, which is supposed to be away from the roadway, to the bike lane, which is adjacent to your travel lanes. But if you are thoughtful, and if you want to build the connection, like here in Tallahassee, we have a short section of our Goose Pond Trail. It tees into Hermitage Boulevard, which has curb and gutter with bike lanes. And there is, at this point, no transition between the termination of the shared use path and the bike lane. And so if you can provide this transition in a way that's elegant and doesn't send people out into traffic unexpectedly, that would be, I think, a laudable goal. But maybe call us and kind of show us what you're thinking of. But we want to make sure that the shared use path maintains its separation from the roadway, because they tend to be used by people who want to be away from traffic or are less experienced with traffic, and we want to keep them as safe as possible. Then we had a question, Ben and I were just talking about this one. What is the maximum grade of a side street with a stop sign control along a roadway corridor where a proposed sidewalk will have a crosswalk and would have a cross slope above 2%? I'm thinking that if it was new construction, of course, you would want to have your profile so that your crosswalk would have that 2% cross slope in it. But, right, Ben?
Yes.
Arterial profile whiz. In fact, Ben is teaching some classes on this. He's taught some in the past, and I think we'll continue and take his class if he can. But where the question more comes from is if you have an existing roadway, existing built side street, and now you're adding a sidewalk. Well, now you're able to use some of the provisions for ADA when you're working with an existing built environment that allow you to meet the maximum extent feasible. So if we think back to that picture that I finally had a chance to show you where we had the new special emphasis crosswalk that had been kind of pulled down the hill and was at a more level part in crossing Easy Street, that side street there, US 41 in Citrus County. And so what they've done is they've worked that crossing to be a little closer to the travel lane to get a shallower cross slope. And so as a designer, what you're going to want to do is try to make that connection at a point where the running slope of the side street, which becomes the cross slope of the crosswalk, is as level as possible. And then remember too that that's always when you have that opportunity to create that longer level landing on the bottom of your curb ramp, so that the person can negotiate these differences in cross slope with a little bit of depth and can attack it more slowly. Let's see what else we have for questions. Let's see, the question above is relative to a project which adds a sidewalk and no other changes to the roadways are proposed. Good. I hope that I've answered your question. If not, give us a call. Okay. Are there any criteria for max horizontal deflection angle without a horizontal curve for shared use path? I'm not really sure what you're asking. You might want to give us a call, but any deflection should be following the criteria that is now in the PPM and in the new AASHTO bike guide for changes in direction. There are times when maybe you might be able to not fully achieve those radii that are in the PPM, and then what we'd have to think about is other ways that you might mitigate for that. So I would encourage you to call us or talk with try to talk with your project manager who's managing your design. And in each of the districts, there is an incredibly talented group of designers led by the senior designer who are a tremendous resource, and your district bike guide coordinator. So try to work with your district, and if you still need to, we can always try to help you with coming up with a solution too. And let's see, we've got 5 more minutes. Will a concrete shared use path, typical be developed and included, or why not? Well, you know, you could start with index 310 and basically use the details for the concrete sidewalk, and you just make it a little bit wider. But you know, all the details for the joints and the transitions that you would have in the sidewalk would also apply to a concrete shared use path. Then, let's see, scroll down here a little bit. And it said, the table on the previous slide said lane width 13 feet, but text said 11 feet or less. I may have made a mistake. What you want to do is when you look at index 17347, we've got conditions for the placement of the sharrow in the lane and I'm not looking at it right now. I took that stuff back already. But at less than 11 feet center of the lane, I believe from 11 to 13 there is an offset, and then at plus 13 there is a greater, there is another offset. So please just go back to 17347 or, let's see, looking at your question again. I think that might have been a mistake. So anyway, good catch. You're paying attention.